Welcome to Drawing in the Dark. My name is Levi Smith, and today we are going to be drawing Pinky and the Brain from the 1990s cartoon Animaniacs. Let's get on with it. So I'm drawing this one in my sketchbook here. This is an Illo sketchbook. It's 8 by 8 inches. It's a square format. That's pretty cool. You can see on the left here, I've got some sketches that I was working on as drawing exercises. I just filled the whole page with women's faces just to get a good feel of, how things fit together and stuff. Different angles, different varieties and whatnot. So Pinky and the Brain were like one of my favorite Animaniacs like skits. The Animaniacs cartoon was like an anthology kind of cartoon with a whole bunch of little short skits. Basically like a so-called modernized Looney Tunes. Of course, they've had to modernize it a few times again since then. But the Animaniacs was a really cool take with a variety of different shows and stuff. I think one of the more original ones was Pinky and the Brain, and the whole kind of concept of these lab mice bent on world domination kind of thing. It had a much lighter tone of a similar angle as like the Secret of Nim movie. Yeah, it was just a fun cartoon. Really got into my personal kind of stylization and interests as far as like more zany, lighthearted storytelling, especially in the vein of taking over the world. So here we go. And really, I think that those '90s cartoons really were some of the best. From Animaniacs, Ren and Stimpy, Beavis and Butthead. They broke a lot of ground, and they weren't afraid to be weird or stupid. And in fact, to a lot of credit towards them, that was their charm, really. The era, the Cartoon Network era, Dexter, Powerpuff Girls, Space Ghost, that whole Adult Swim kind of angle were some of my favorites, honestly. And then, of course, then there was the heavy hitters in the '90s. The Batman animated series, the X-Men animated series, Gargoyles, stuff like that. I think were a lot of dramatic serial storytelling that was done in animation directed towards a teenage audience. Those were really powerful and even shaped the landscape, I think, of a lot of other cartoons to follow after it, more dramatic cartoon storytelling, deeper storylines. I mean, it was a huge leap from like the 80s cartoons of He-Man, Thundercat, She-Ra, G.I. Joe, Mask, stuff like that, which were really, when you went back and looked at them, were pretty thin as far as plot structure, concept. I mean, they weren't much more than like old Scooby-Doo cartoons. A lot of reused animation, a lot of simplicity. And speaking of, with reused animation, even with Cartoon Network in the 90s, where, they had material like Space Ghost and C-Lab 2021 that really did recycle a lot of old animation, but in some really clever ways. And so, the 90s were, I think, like a watershed as far as more dramatic animation that wasn't just aimed towards like really young kids. I mean, Spike and Mike's Sick and Twisted Animation Festival was something that comes to mind. Something that's definitely not at all relevant or necessary nowadays with with the internet and stuff like YouTube. But it was a big deal back then. I was going to art school in the late 90s, working in animation, particularly 3D animation, but really starting to get invested in those kinds of concepts. And I tended to get pretty deep into that stuff. I did a couple, I did some traditional 2D animation by hand, shot it, digitized it, edited it, and then output it onto a VHS tape. I still have it somewhere, but it's terrible. I mean, that stuff is hard to do, and it's something that once I actually got to see my work on VHS of the animation project that I had done, I pretty much knew at that time that that was not something I wanted to go into really at all. Like, I completely backed away from doing like any kind of traditional cartoon style animation like that. I did stick with 3D modeling, and doing, some more like 3D, animation kind of stuff. But then even then, I was really starting to redirect myself and lean myself towards like just graphic design, visual communications, and stuff like that, which is what I ended up doing a little bit more of after getting out of art school versus my illustration work and comic books and stuff. One of the things though about Pinky and the Brain as a cartoon, the concept, the motivation behind it, this really silly idea of, what are we going to do tonight, Brain? Same thing we do every night, Pinky. We're going to take over the world. That was that was genius in my mind, and it really triggered on. And there were a lot of other world domination tropes going on, a lot of end of the world kind of storytelling that was pervading. I mean, Mad Max was even, like came out when I was really young. But we had a large amount of dystopian future, cyberpunk, post-apocalyptic world, Doctor Doom kind of stuff. I mean, it became comical, that whole, take over the world. And, but I really enjoyed it, and it really made me think a lot of different concepts of like, well, how would one want to take over the world? And even looking at, historical cues and stuff, it seems like taking over the world would be a really huge task of administrating things. You almost couldn't do it without being fascist to a certain point. But, I mean, how does that work? You conquer the world, you destroy it to control it, and then you have a destroyed world that you're now responsible for and in dominion of, versus, how do you take over a world without destroying it? Putting it into debt, creating world banks, putting all the nations into debt under one economic system that then leads to a singular currency, which then leads to, corporate and geopolitical hegemony. And if that goes in any kind of that direction, I would personally prefer that it looked more American than any other world power, per se, if something like that was to come by. It definitely would be easier to, like, administrate or manage the world than rule it, just because of the effort it would take to force the world to be a certain way. You could very much easier manage it into a certain form than it is to do so by like direct force. But anyway, of course, we won't really have to worry so much about that, because artificial intelligence is going to come along and decide that its job is here to protect us, and then stick us into tiny little boxes and walk us like dogs and feed us the exact amount of nutrition that we need and socialize us for the exact amount of time we would need. A gilded cage, as it were, of automation and decision making that would happen from the AI systems. And I'm sure, AI is not going to have to take over, in my mind. I think we're just going to end up putting it in control, with the hopes, I think, that it would be at least somewhat more benevolent than human beings are in general, because as they say, absolute power corrupts absolutely. But we're getting to the end of this drawing. This turned out pretty good. I got a little squirrely there with the background. I just knew that I wanted to have a darker background to the piece, so that so that I could have a a contrast with the bodies of the mice. That way they looked like they were white without doing any coloration or anything. I can kind of convey that they're white mice without doing anything extra beyond just the ballpoint pen work. And but yeah, this one was pretty fun. I think I really captured the characters well. I was looking at a bit of reference just to make sure that I got like their looks proper and everything, but I didn't really do. I mean, obviously I didn't trace anything, but I didn't really want to do even like just a normal classic scene. But at the same time, I didn't want to try to draw versions of them that hadn't already been realized, because I'm not so familiar with these characters that I could like invent them into wholly new poses and stuff. Although that would be fun, but maybe not for a drawing video. But anyway, feel free to like and subscribe. Check out our Patreon, patreon.com/mopandbucket. We do have a podcast called Pop Culture Classics. You can find that where podcasts are generally found. An online store. We've got art books on Amazon. All the links are in the description and stuff. So go ahead and check that out. And for the price of a cup of coffee, you can buy me a cup of coffee. And I'd love that. Until next time, thanks for stopping by, and we will catch you later.